Dr. Karl Kruszelnick, welcome to 1+1.
Look, thank you for that incredibly wonderful pronunciation. It proves to me one thing, that you are a true journalist, because only journalists can get it so accurately, so quickly.
You write a book almost every year. You've written 34 of them. How do you go about the writing process?
It's sort of like a medical exam. You can't prime for it. You just have to do it. At one stage, I had hoped that writing a book would be just simply like you go away for a weekend, have lots of drugs and sex, and at the end of the weekend, there's the book. No, it's basically a solitary profession. So it takes most of a year. I write the stories, and then I pick out the best ones, and then I amplify them and spread them out. So I read my way through $10,000 worth of scientific literature every year. That's a pile about a metre thick every month.
Why do you say $10,000 worth?
That's what it cost me.
To download and to buy the research?
Well, Nature is $500 a year. Aviation Week and Space Technology, otherwise known as Megadeth Weekly, because every week they talk about new and unusual ways to kill people that weren't thought of last week. So that's $700 a year. Science is $700 a year, and you do that a couple of times, and very quickly you're up to $10,000 a year.
So you read the research and you respond by writing a book. Is that based on the kinds of questions that listeners and people ask you?
Yes, and also on what I find interesting, which is in turn related to what people find interesting. I try to write stuff that the guy or girl in the pub would find interesting enough to remember and then pass on to somebody else.
Why is that?
I like telling stories, I discovered. I have no idea why, it just happened, but so I just tell these stories and start off with a story about why it is that when women live together under the same roof they synchronise menstrual periods, and you can use this information to tame a wild dog, and that was about 30 years ago, and so I just started off from there and kept on going.
How did you come to be born in Sweden?
Refugee camp baby. So my father was in a concentration camp at Sachsenhausen. My mother was at Auschwitz. They both survived for really unlikely reasons. In my mother's case, because the Nazis ran out of bullets. In my father's case, because he was able to bribe his way to somewhere else with a tin of sardines. And basically the Americans came along and said, we'll keep you alive. And then the Red Cross said, you want to go to Sweden? Sure. And they ended up in Sweden, fell in love. Then I was born in Sweden. And
let's go back a little bit. You said your mother is alive because they ran out of bullets.
At Auschwitz, they ran out of bullets. There weren't enough bullets left to kill all the women.
So she was in a firing line?
She was in a concentration camp, and the Auschwitz concentration camp, and they just wanted to get rid of all the evidence of people who could speak against them. And they had literally run out of bullets. And so one morning they woke up and they were just gone, and then a little bit later the Americans rolled in.
And your father's story?
He was in a couple of concentration camps, a Russian concentration camp as well as a German one as well, and got turned in by his girlfriend in Warsaw because he was anti-Nazi. My father actually was a people smuggler, and he smuggled Jews out of war-torn or Nazi-controlled Poland. So I guess I come from a vaguely crooked background there. And he ended up at Sachsenhausen, and there was a capo, one of the guards who'd been given some authority. He was going up and down the line with a whip, whipping them and saying under his breath, you are 18 and you have a trade. My father thought, he's giving me a survival clue. My father was 40 and had no trade, so he lied and said, I'm 30 and I'm a carpenter. And so he's a big, strong bloke, and so he went into the short queue of people who didn't get killed straight away, and his job was picking up dead Jews out of the gas ovens and taking them to somewhere else where they'd then get burnt. And he actually got depressed by this, but luckily he was irrationally optimistic, as I am, and so one day he was carrying this dead Jewish guy, and he was feeling bad because he'd been treated so badly he'd forgotten the name of his parents, and this sort of got him down a bit. And he was really skinny, and he had ulcers on his legs, and a few of his mates had died, and he thought, there's no future in this job for me here in a concentration camp, and he was feeling, what's the point, I may as well just die. And then he was carrying this dead Jewish guy on his shoulders, and the guy's head was sort of going, he started hearing this voice, and he said, cuckoo, cuckoo, and he started laughing. He thought, oh, I'll just keep on living then. And he'd managed to score a tin of sardines, which is so much concentrated protein. And also, because he was an intellectual, he could speak 12 languages and had a master's degree in economics and law, he was able to get on with the camp doctor who he played chess with. And they knew the Americans were coming, and so he said, look, can you bribe me to go into the Russian part of the camp and die? So officially what happened was that a Russian soldier died, and that body was given my father's name, and my father went over there into the Russian part of the concentration camp, helped by the bribe of the tin of sardines. If it wasn't for that tin of sardines, he wouldn't have made it.
When did you hear that story?
When he was in his later years, they didn't want to talk about the concentration camps at all. And both of my parents were a bit paranoid and distrustful, which in my younger years as a drug-crazed hippie, I thought, oh man, it's all full of love. And then later on I thought, yeah, you can't trust everybody. You got to know whom to trust.
So when you were a child, were you inquisitive about their background, or is it just a pretty typical thing for a youngster to do and not ask questions?
I asked some questions and they lied to me. So I never knew that my mother was Jewish, but in fact they told me all the time that she was Lutheran, was born in Sweden. And only when she was dementing with Alzheimer's disease did I find out that she, as a Jewish person, had ended up in a concentration camp because of that.
What did that knowledge about your parents do to you?
Well, my parents had brought me up well. And in the same way my parents brought me up with what I think are good values of kindness and compassion and tolerance, although they still had this paranoid background to them.
And why did they choose to come to Australia?
Well, they had no choice, really. They were going to come to the USA or Canada, and they were on a ship because they were in Sweden. I'd been born in Sweden. And then the ship came along to take them to Canada or USA. I can't find out which. I think it was one or the other. And then I had a big fever from the smallpox injection. And they got paranoid and said, we don't know what's going on, we'll just stay here, we don't want something bad to happen at sea. And then the ship sailed away and the fever went down and the next ship was going to Australia, so here I am in Australia.
And when you landed in Australia, was that as a refugee or did you move into housing?
I grew up in a refugee camp for the first couple of years of my life in Australia, and I went back to see it with my mother. We drove past Bonegilla, and you know those white tradie vans that you see the tradies driving around? It was that big for three of us. And what we used to get was one egg a week, and I remember that from my childhood. And I never really understood, but when I was in my 20s, I said, what was the story with the egg? And my parents said, well, we only had one egg every week for the whole family, so we gave it to you.
Amazing.
That's what parents do.
And so you grew up in Wollongong, I believe.
Yeah, so moved from the refugee camp into Sydney for a little tiny while, and we ran across a lovely Dr. Waddell from Northern Suburbs who helped us along in so many ways. He and his wife were so generous, and the family was, and they helped set us up in Wollongong and get started there. And so Wollongong was a nice place to live, and I grew up in Wollongong.
You had no brothers or sisters?
I was the only blessing.
And what was Wollongong like in the 1950s?
Racist, bullying, but nobody was trying to kill us. So back then it was you're either a Protestant or a Catholic, and therefore I hated the other side because of an accident of birth or religion. And then suddenly these Woggy people came in from Europe and all other places, and so that was a different target to hate. So they both ganged up on hating us, and so it just goes on. And in fact, I saw a funny poster, graffiti in Marrickville the other day which said, "Refugees out." It was written in Vietnamese. So each generation then hates the next generation once they've become assimilated.
So does that have a lasting effect when you're, as a kid, when you're teased for being a wog and you're treated badly?
It could to some people, but I was lucky and it had no lasting effect except it made me who I am today. So some people could say that the terribly dysfunctional person you see in front of you is a result of that. So I managed to come through okay. I was lucky.
I've heard that in the past you've said things like you were perhaps not emotional enough in your younger years. What was that due to? Were you very self-sufficient?
No, I went to a Catholic school, and let me just say the word sexual abuse and leave it at there. I was lucky they didn't abuse me because I later found out from some of the boys who were abused, they thought I was weird.
Who thought you were weird?
The
priests?
Catholic teachers. And they didn't know how I'd behave. Maybe I wouldn't keep my mouth shut.
But you knew other boys who were abused?
Later, yes. I saw some things going on, but I didn't know anything at the time. I didn't even know about girls until I was 21. You know, I knew nothing. I saw, on one time I went back to the classroom, I saw one of the teachers cuddling a boy, and somebody was crying, and I didn't put it together because I just didn't know anything about that sort of stuff. And my parents were very loving, but terribly scarred by the war. I mean, my father, when he was in the Russian part of the concentration camp at Sachsenhausen, he saw Russian soldiers killing each other and eating each other's brains because that was the only part of their body that had any fat. You can't just see that and then walk away from it and not be affected by it. And when I was working as a doctor at Concord, I saw some of the guys from Vietnam, and originally, in the early 70s, I was totally against the war and the soldiers. And I was so wrong. The soldiers, it wasn't their fault. And by being against the soldiers, I made their problems worse. And so I tried to make up for it in later years. And so at Concord, I just saw how horribly wrecked some people can be made by experiencing bad things.
You're talking from PTSD or from being injured?
No physical injuries. Oh, the physical injuries keep right out of it. Mental, just broken in the brain. With regard to wars, some people come through okay. Some people actually manage to skate through and come out better, and a lot of people just have terrible, terrible memories. It's a terrible thing. I was working as a doctor at the kids' hospital, and this 16-year-old kid came in, and he was just a little bit odd, a little bit weird. And the railway cops had brought him in because he had his feet on the seat, and they said, get your feet off the seat, and he wouldn't do it. And they thought he was a bit weird. And as I got talking to him, I found that he'd killed 600 people. Cambodia. Pol Pot killed his first person at the age of 3 with a machine gun, pulled the trigger. He's killed 600 people by the age of 16. I mean, I did what I could. Sent up for a psych consult. There's a limit to what you can do, and I don't know what happened to him after that, because I was just a lowly doctor in emergency at the kids' hospital.
Did that event move you away from people towards more stuff about the universe?
Yeah, I did find it a little bit difficult because I was a woggy kid, and so I didn't have any friends, and I was always bullied all the way through school, and they let my tyres down at high school, and all sorts of stuff all the time. It was just consistent. I tried playing football once, and everybody used it as an excuse to hit me, jump on top of me and hit me. So then I got to be really good at picking up papers. That was my sports all the way through high school.
Picking up papers?
Yeah, you could either play football or pick up papers. I was the under-16 Division 2 Milo champion in tennis in Wollongong, but all they offered me was either getting beaten up in football or picking up papers. So I'm pretty good at picking up papers. I still do it.
Now I'm feeling sad.
Look, give me a cocktail. I'll talk for hours about my unhappy childhood, but it all worked out for a happy ending. Like, I'm living in a country where nobody's trying to kill me. It's a wonderful place. With regard to bring up a baby, Australia is number 2 in the whole world. So if a baby is born now, and looking at the health of the mother and her health in bringing that baby through into adulthood, and then she dies, and then the baby, and then the future for the baby, Australia's number 2 in the whole world. We're a very lucky country to live in.
You're a qualified medical doctor, engineer.
Biomedical engineer, so I designed and built a machine for Fred Hollows to pick up electrical signals off the human eyeball to diagnose certain types of diseases. Now, you know how in the medical shows they have the heart one, beep, beep, and then they go clear and all that sort of stuff. By looking carefully at that, you can actually diagnose certain diseases.
So, apart from that, you've also got a physics qualification.
And mathematics.
And mathematics.
Yes.
So, my question is...
and several non-degree years of study in computer science, astrophysics, philosophy and electrical engineering just to round me off.
So, okay, how many years have you actually spent studying for professional qualifications?
25, including starting off at primary school, or 15 at university.
25 years?
I've been educated, or 15 years of university level. 15 years of university level education, of which I didn't pay any, and I'd like to thank the taxpayer of Australia for doing that, because education is not a cost, it's an investment.
But some people might say 25 years of education is excessive.
Yes, and you sure?
For what purpose 25 years of education?
Well, I never knew. I never knew why I was doing it until one night I was doing a late shift at the kids' hospital between midnight and dawn, and in came this 3-year-old kid, and he had pneumonia. And so I finished with the patient, called in the parents. So I said, we've got good news and bad news. The bad news is that your kid has got pneumonia. The good news is that you live in a wealthy country. We'll bring him in, we'll stab him, we'll put an IV line, we'll give him antibiotics. He'll never have any bad effects from this pneumonia for the rest of his life. If you're in a poor country, he could have died. But here he's going to live. And they burst into tears, and I burst into tears. And at that moment, I knew that the purpose of my education was to help liberate people from what was holding them back. And so nowadays, when I do a supermarket shop, and I'm fairly obsessive about it, going up and down every row, looking at all the labels, typically somebody will come up to me and say, hi Karl, look, thanks for what you're doing on the radio, and as a result of listening to you, I've decided to become a chippy, become a nurse, go back to school, something involving their brain. And I don't know what there is on being on a radio show and answering questions that helps people think, I can change my life for something better, but I've been lucky enough to be given this position where I can help change people's lives for the better.
But there was a time that you were trying a whole load of different jobs.
Oh, yeah.
And one of those was to drive a taxi.
Yeah.
How long did you have to drive a taxi to reach 250,000 kilometres?
15 years.
15 years.
Well, I was a gun driver. Now, the average driver would only do 250 k's a night. I'd do 400. And I'd thrash the car and do lots of kilometres. And back then, from 71 to 85, I was getting sometimes $80, $100 a night, which is as much as they make now. The poor drivers, they're being ripped off something fierce. And
so why did you do that? Was that a kind of service to the public?
no, I just wanted to earn money. And also I was living in this strange place called Sydney, and I had no idea. I just go to Newtown and then look for King Street. What? Where's Newtown? No idea. And so I thought by being a taxi driver, I could both learn money and learn about Sydney. And it was a great education. And also I was still pretty shy. And then I could do outrageous things. So I'd be in the front seat and they'd be in the back seat and it'd be night time and there'd be no eye contact and they'd be talking. And I'd say, you know, you guys don't really seem like you should be married to each other. You don't seem compatible. You can't get away with that under normal circumstances, but I could get away with it. And the guy or the woman would say, well, no, that's not true. And the other one would say, I've been meaning to bring that up. So I got over my shyness. But I love driving and I love meeting people. It was wonderful.
Was it a dangerous job?
I got beaten unconscious once and 2 of my friends got killed, yes.
2 of your friends got killed.
One of them, an American Indian guy, was only a few hundred metres from the Legion cab base, and all he had was $40, and they did a hemisection on his neck. They got a knife and just went straight through, halfway through to his spinal cord, and he just died for $40.
And did you ever try to... Look, I'll be honest, I read something that frightened me. It was about how you might have tried to get back at some people who tried to attack you. Do you recall that incident?
Yes, but I'm reluctant to talk about it because I did bad things.
You don't like to talk about bad things?
They were trying to kill me, and I'd already been beaten unconscious, and this was on a Sunday night, and on a Thursday night my other mate had been killed. And so I was attacked by 3 people and did bad things. And then when I went to the cop shop, they said, good on you, mate.
So you're not prepared to tell us what you did?
If they're listening, they'll come and get me. But on the other hand, I'd been beaten unconscious, and on the night I was beaten unconscious, the girl who was in the back was taken out and raped, and I say girl because she was under 16, and had both of her legs broken, and I was beaten unconscious, and I really thought they were trying to kill me. I thought they were trying to kill me. And as far as I was concerned, having been beaten unconscious once and having 2 of my friends dead, I was not going to let them kill me. I was going to do what I had to, and unfortunately, I went a bit too far. I'm sorry.
Did you try and run them over?
Of course. But I can't, it's a really nasty story. I saw the dark side of me and I didn't like it. And that's sort of taught me compassion, that we all have a dark side and we can all end up doing bad things if we get pushed into it hard enough by the life around us.
I was also going to ask you whether driving a taxi shows you a very specific part of human nature.
Oh, you meet all sorts of people. There are lovely people out there. And from driving taxis, I realised by meeting so many people that overall, looking at a large sample size of the people in Sydney, that's all I know, the majority are not malevolent. They're just ignorant. They just don't know any better. They really don't know what it's like to be a refugee. They don't know what it's like to be poor. They don't know what it's like never to have a Tim Tam in your whole life.
So do you think that rule that people aren't malevolent, they're ignorant,
Mostly.
pretty much applies to society as a whole?
Yes, except for the 1% who are psychopaths. And by psychopath I mean that they have no regrets, no conscience, no emotional involvement, and given the right circumstances can be superficially charming. And what happens to psychopaths depends upon the background matrix, and you set up a 2x2 grid, of intelligence and violence. If they are not particularly intelligent, and if they're not particularly violent, they'll become a burglar, because they don't care. If they're not particularly intelligent but they're a bit violent, they'll become a standover guy, a thug. If they're intelligent and violent, they can become a criminal, or if they can rein it back, SAS or police. And you've got to have those type of people to deal with who's in our society. And if they're intelligent and not violent, surgeon, CEO, politician. And so there's a 1% of the population who really will lie and have no qualms and who don't care about you one bit. But apart from them, most people are just ignorant and don't know the other side of your story.
What is wisdom?
Oh, it's part of the stage, one of the steps towards enlightenment. So you get facts, and then from facts you work your way up to getting knowledge, and then you try to integrate it to get wisdom, and then if you're really cool and probably close near death, you can finally turn it into enlightenment. So it's a step along the path of knowledge.
Do you have wisdom?
Not a lot. I've got little tiny bits, which very few I've generated myself, but mostly I've been able to recognise wisdom from other people and then plagiarise it and then pass it on.
When do you think we know if we have wisdom?
I don't know. I haven't got there yet.
You work incredibly hard. What's the purpose of it? I know you like to impart knowledge, but do you have a goal? Are we going to see you say in 5 years or so, I'm retiring?
No, look, I found my goal that night I was working in the kids' hospital. My goal, which forever, by destiny, is to help liberate people from what holds them back. I get so much satisfaction from it. I can be a bit facetious and talk about the praise coefficient. And you, Jane, you probably got all the praise you ever need in your whole life in kindergarten when the teacher said, "That's really good, Jane, the way you've drawn and coloured in inside the lines." And that was probably all the praise you needed for your whole life, but I needed all the time.
Is that right?
Maybe that's why I'm doing it, just because I'm selfish and I want people to say I'm a good bloke, whereas in fact I've got a dark inside and I'm just trying to cover it up.
You went to Afghanistan this year.
Yeah, I wanted to do it for a few reasons. One, in some way to pay back the fact that I've been mean to the soldiers. I was mean to the soldiers in the Vietnam War. I was wrong. That's the good thing I like about scientists. Scientists will say I was wrong.
You mean your position that you took?
The intellectual position, blaming the soldiers for going to Vietnam, that was 100% wrong, and I've been trying to make up for it ever since. And so by going to Afghanistan, regardless of the politics of the situation, the people like you and me that we walk past in the street, the soldiers, I was trying to support them. And in a way, try to pay off my guilt for being mean to them in the past. And it was amazing. I did 6 gigs in 4 locations, and I just saw so much stuff I wouldn't have seen any other way, and I'm glad I had the chance to try and make their lives a bit better. It was a bit weird. We had a comedian and a band and me, and some of the techos liked me to pieces, and some of the other people said, "Bring back the funny guy again." Yeah, that's okay. I mean, if you want the Rolling Stones, a string quartet is not going to make you happy.
Is there anything you haven't been able to explain to an audience?
Oh, so many things. Why the moon is bigger on the horizon. The love of man for a woman. So many stuff about the brain. Today I got stumped on one because I do 11 radio shows every week. Why is dust grey? It is, isn't it? It's grey, isn't it? Why? I don't know. Such a deep question. I've got a book called Dust, and I didn't read it. And this is the second time I've had a question on dust. I was able to read enough of it to know why cities get buried. And so you go back to Rome, and then there's other Romes deeper underneath, buried by the dust of human civilization, where we throw things on top of things. But why is dust grey? Now, I've been thinking about it a bit more. Very few of the metals are shiny or have a colour. Only a very small number. And maybe the metals, I don't know, I'd have to talk to an optical physicist, and then they'd probably pass me on to a physical chemist, and I'd probably have to get both of them together. And the other one I can't get an answer to is, why do some people have a shiver after having a wee? And I tried asking a urologist who specialises in urine, who said, no, you want to talk to a neurologist who specialises in nerves, who told me to talk back to the urologist. That's a classic case of buff and turf. Go and see the other person. So I haven't got an answer to that one either.
So do the problems ever keep you awake?
No, I love sleep. As a parent, I know that sleep is better than sex. So I'll try and have as much sleep as I can. But sometimes I ruminate upon them, but not ever stopping me from sleeping, no.
Dr. Karl, it's been a great pleasure. Thank you for speaking with 1+1.
Oh, thank you.